Welcome to The World This Week, and welcome to our guests who are going to help us chew over the past 7 days of global events. Introducing, in no order of preference, because they're all equally welcome and wonderful, Craig Kapitas of the Daily Beast. Great to see you, sir, and thank you for coming into our studio this Bastille day. Joining us from afar, Richard Verly of Bild. Richard is in Geneva, and always welcome. Great to see you, Richard. Looking good. Vladislav Davidson. Thank you, sir. Vladislav Davidson of the Atlantic Council joins us too from New York. Vladislav, great to see you, sir. Love to see you. Great, love to see you. It's great to see you. And Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent in Ukraine. Hi, Gulliver. Great to see you there. Gulliver joining us live from Kyiv. Fantastic. I'm letting you all loose in a second. Let's give you a brief introduction. The NATO Summit this week was almost a one-man show, starring someone whose country isn't even a member of NATO, Volodymyr Zelensky. He, of course, hoping to win over the alliance to give him a time frame for membership. He didn't get that. But Zelensky did secure more weapons and a lot of goodwill from the de facto leader of NATO, US President Joe Biden, pledging to do whatever it takes to ensure a Ukrainian victory over the invading Russian troops. Let's listen to Biden.
We will not waver. We will not waver. I mean that. Our commitment to Ukraine will not weaken. We will stand for liberty and freedom today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes.
Joe Biden there. Let's go to our Ukraine correspondent, Gulliver Cragg, giving the honour of first crack at this one. Gulliver, great to see you. Give us a sense of how Volodymyr Zelensky at the NATO summit was interpreted where you are.
Well, you know, the initial reaction in Kyiv when the declaration came out, not giving Ukraine even a time frame for receiving a formal invitation to join NATO, was one of great disappointment, resentment and anger. I have the impression that a lot of Ukrainians interpreted the word conditions, which was in that communique, when the conditions are met, as suggesting that the alliance wanted to impose yet more conditions on Ukraine's reforms. And I think that they reacted particularly to that, thinking that this was unfair at this stage in the proceedings. People had just really got their hopes up, basically, that there was going to be a momentous decision, that the rhetoric was going to move on from things they've already heard. Our commitment will not waver, all of these fine words, but they've been said before, to something a bit more concrete. But then in the days after that, both among the leadership and in public opinion, public discussion of it, I think as the dust settles, the Ukrainians are beginning to see more the positive side of things. They did get a lot of new promises of weapons out of this summit. And of course, from the point of view of the leadership and the kind of communication that President Zelensky is putting out, they've also got to bear in mind that they don't want the Ukrainians to get down. The morale of the troops, particularly on the front lines, to suffer as a result of not having got what they wanted to do.
Gulliver, for now, thank you very much indeed. Vladislav, I hope you heard what Gulliver was saying. Give us your sense of how you're interpreting what happened at the NATO deal.
It was indeed a disappointment to lots of people in Ukraine. It was obvious that they had wanted more, and a lot of my friends in the activist class and in the lobbyist, in the kind of expatriate lobbyist class of Ukrainians in Washington and New York and London had really put a lot of energy in the previous 2 weeks into changing a decision which had already been made, and thus they had made themselves open for disappointment, and that's always a bad thing in life. And so it's obvious that the Ukrainians should not have been as emotionally involved in getting, in retrospect, something like a map. But, you know, indeed, the communique could have been worded more elegantly and more generously. And it does seem that the first 24 hours of great disappointment that we saw on the social media of our friends and colleagues has kind of dissipated. And now people are really looking forward toward trying to get some real security guarantees outside of traditional NATO entry.
Indeed, Vladislav, given the nature of the situation, I suppose it's inevitable that people were really emotionally invested in trying to get this NATO membership.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, this is trying to figure out how the war is going to end. It's obvious to everybody that you can't just let a country which has 25% of its territory still occupied into the NATO alliance immediately. That would make the NATO alliance de facto at war with the Russian Federation and Belarus the next morning. Obviously, no one is expecting that. It is a map for entry into NATO after the war. I mean, the day after the war is what the Ukrainians are hoping for. There are other configurations of security arrangements and security guarantees that Kiev could get from the Europeans and America, which are mirroring aspects of membership, but without the Article 5 guarantees of all for one and one for all war if invaded. So there are going to have to be some sort of guarantees, but it can't yet be NATO membership at this point immediately. It's going to have to be after the war. It's going to have to come in some sort of phased-in stages. And what that looks like is being negotiated quietly now, and let's hope that Ukrainians do get some sort of security guarantees.
Vladislav, for now, thank you very much indeed. Richard Verley joining us in Geneva from Built. Richard, the appearance of Zelensky in Vilnius raised the hopes of a lot of people. What was your interpretation of how Zelensky performed there?
Well, as you know, Mark, I was covering the Vilnius summit. I was there for the NATO summit. And to me, there are two lessons to be drawn from the summit, in addition to what was just said. First lesson is a political communication, and I would call it a rather defeat for Volodymyr Zelensky. He has always been, we know it, very shrewd, very efficient with his communication tactic, but this time it failed. He came in Vilnius with this tweet saying it is absurd to keep Ukraine at bay from NATO. So he strongly, I would not say attacked, but he clearly engaged into a kind of duel with NATO on the beginning of the summit, and then the next day he had to say thank you to everyone for offering not a timetable but some kind of guarantee. So I believe Volodymyr Zelensky probably in this summit was not as efficient as he is politically and communication wise. Then the second lesson I would draw is a strategic lesson, and it's a tough lesson for Zelensky too. War will continue. War will continue because Russia, Vladimir Putin know that as much as the war is going on, Ukraine will not be in NATO. So draw the conclusion, if Russia does not want NATO at its border, it should continue to fight for Ukraine and for the separatist territory in Ukraine. That's not a very good news for Ukrainian society, and I would concur with what your correspondent just said. It's going to be hard times, though equipment will continue to come. Maybe we will see the F-16 jets, but it means Ukrainian society has to be prepared for more fighting, while, and I saw it myself in Ukraine recently, a lot of people would like to get out of this war.
Richard, for now, bear with us. Let's bring in Craig Peters here in the studio. Craig, I've got many questions, but I know you've got an answer you probably want to give us straight away. Over to you, sir. What's your take on the situation?
We should start a new board game called Decoding NATO.
Decoding NATO.
Yeah, Decoding NATO. There were, in my estimation, a couple of things here. First thing we saw is we're seeing the stripping away of this shared fiction that we're not going to give Ukraine air cover, a no-fly zone, because we're worried about Putin using nuclear weapons. We're seeing a stripping away of that. Of course, no one wants to take that chance, but the reason NATO, which is the United States, hasn't gone in full tilt boogie here has never had anything to do with nukes. It has to do with America's fear of American soldiers coming home in body bags, which is politically untenable. Airmen mostly, if they get shot down. So they're not that and the fiction for that has been, well, it's the nukes. The second thing here is I think it was fascinating, particularly having spent so much time covering and working in Turkey, how Erdogan shifted here, and Vlad mentioned Article 5 of NATO, which is, one guy gets hit, they all get hit. Well, my bet is that if we see Article 5 triggered here, it's going to be in the Black Sea. A lot of people tend to forget this war is just not on land in Ukraine and affecting Europe. This is a sea war, and the Black Sea is a big place, and the Turkish navy is fairly substantial. And, Erdogan has a trigger finger. We've seen that in the past for what, shot down a Russian jet over Syria, I believe, a number of years ago. To me, those are the two things: Black Sea and no body bags, particularly during an upcoming election year in the United States.
You mentioned the aircraft. Well, Sergei Lavrov, Russia's wildly old and some might say mendacious foreign minister, spoke out to condemn the announcement of a NATO coalition of 11 countries to help Ukraine to F-16 fighter jets. This, of course, all announced in Vilnius. Control of the skies has been a Ukrainian mantra since the invasion was launched by Vladimir Putin on February the 24th last year. Lavrov sees a provision of F-16s by NATO to Ukraine as a clear provocation.
Russia can't ignore the ability of these aircraft to carry nuclear weapons. No amount of assurances will help here. We will regard the very fact that the Ukrainian armed forces have such systems as a threat from the West in the nuclear sphere.
Craig, go ahead.
More nonsense from the mouth of Peskov. Look it. There is absolutely no question that Ukrainian pilots should be driving these jets protecting their country. But that's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. And it's certainly these jets does not provide full air cover, a no-fly zone, which is what is needed. You need everything. You need AWACS. You need all kinds of radar. You want to shoot down any incoming Russian projectile, whether it's a drone, a helicopter, a jet, a missile, whatever. There is the technology to do that. And a bunch of guys, as heroic as the Ukrainian guys, as heroic as they might be, flying U.S.-made jets, just doesn't cut the mustard in this position. The war is going to continue, and until NATO gives the Ukrainians air cover. And I just don't see that happening.
Straight back to Kyiv, Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent there, who's been covering the conflict from the very start. Yeah. Gulliver, I hope you listened to, able to hear what Craig was saying.
They're a million miles.
Go ahead.
Giving Ukraine air cover themselves. I mean, it would involve American pilots dropping bombs on targets inside Russia in order to take out the places where Russia is launching missiles from. That's really not even on the table. But what is on the table is giving Ukraine the F-16s. And that's what I wanted to respond to what Richard Verley was saying earlier. I'm not sure that we do need to see this as a poorer performance than usual from Volodymyr Zelensky. This is what he always does. He comes in asking for something that seems like his Western partners are not going to be likely to give it, or that it's, he comes in saying he's very desperately needs something very urgently. He's going to be very offended if he doesn't get it, and then he doesn't get it, but he does get it a few months later. That's what happened, for example, with his trip to London at the beginning of this year, talking about the F-16s. Much later than Ukraine really would have liked to have got them, but it does look like they are going to be coming. And same with all of the, sophisticated weaponry that Ukraine's been asking for, really. Ukraine has adopted a strategy of asking for what they really need, even at the stage when they know that they're not likely to get it, because what happens is they do end up getting it. And so these kinds of emotional approaches of being really quite aggressive on the part of the Ukrainian president. But then, of course, once it's decided what Ukraine is getting, turning back to being extremely charming and grateful and appreciative. That's the strategy that works, it seems to me. It's not working as well as Ukrainians would like it to be in terms of the rapidity of the delivery of these systems, but I don't see any real change here in the way Zelensky behaves and the level of success he's achieving by this.
Maybe a word, if I may, Mark.
Yes, go ahead, Richard. Go ahead.
Yes. Gulliver is perfectly right for the tactic, which is already always asking for more and getting what can be delivered. But I can tell you that in Vilnius, the atmosphere, we could feel that the Ukrainian delegation was disappointed, and we could feel the change of tone when Jack Sullivan, I believe it's Jack Sullivan, the National Security Council advisor, came in briefing the American press and saying Zelensky should be more grateful to its allies. It means something. I mean, they wanted Zelensky to say thank you. They didn't put him in a very pleasant position. So you're right, Gulliver, absolutely right. Ukraine will get maybe what it wants with a bit of delay. But for Zelensky, it was politically tough, I believe, this Vilnius meeting. He would have expected more, and he had to do some face saving, and I'm not sure he was ready to do it.
How do we feel about this idea that Ukraine has to be more grateful? That's that message. You use those words. I mean, it strikes me as a rather churlish thing for the West to be saying.
Ukrainian media have been going on about it so much. I can tell you it has really been the most overcovered event in Ukrainian media that I can remember in recent weeks. It's, I talk about a storm in a teacup.
OK, well, let's leave it at that. Gulliver, can I ask you, what's the situation with air alerts today? Have you had many?
There was just one actually shortly before we started this program, but it was because a jet had taken off somewhere, which is a jet that can potentially carry these missiles. And so they put alerts across the whole country when the planes take off, not knowing whether they're going to fire any missiles. Apparently, this plane didn't fire any missiles, so the alert was pretty short. That's
OK, well, no one hurt, and let's hope that continues in that sense. But as we know, things inevitably are going to get worse before they get better. Let's just catch up with Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson of the Kremlin, the person you never see on camera anymore. He's spoken about the Wagner Group, yes, the one that rebelled against Putin at the end of last month. Peskov says it never existed. That's right. He said it never existed. Wagner, even though the mercenary group has been coining money for Russia since 2013 with its foreign missions. Let's listen to Peskov.
Yesterday, the president, answering a question from a Kommersant correspondent, said that de jure such a legal entity as PMC Wagner does not exist, and it never existed. And that is a matter for further study and consideration. This is, in general, a fairly complex issue about the legal status of such companies, which should be studied. Everything else refers to those details that we do not disclose.
Before I let the... It's understood that the mercenaries formerly known as Wagner are now in Belarus. They've been there since last Tuesday. Interesting scenario, isn't it? Vladislav, do you fancy a go on that one? Wagner and its role it's played so far and what role it might play in the weeks to come?
Yeah, it's all very bizarre, of course. It's all very cynical and nasty and vulgar, and the kids refer to it as gaslighting, which is manipulation. This is manipulation of the obvious truth. This is a arm of the Russian army, of the Russian state, which has carried out tremendous missions in Africa and obviously in Ukraine, Bakhmut, fighting by the tens of thousands. This is a very important part of the Russian military strategy of projecting power in Africa and in Ukraine. And this kind of manipulative, almost silly conversation from Monsieur Peskov, it doesn't do anything to make us think that he's a serious interlocutor. It's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous that they're saying that Wagner is not really real, that has nothing to do with the Russian state. Putin just a week ago said that they got something like 800 billion rubles from the Russian state over the last 10 years, and we're going to investigate whether, let's hope that there wasn't too much stealing. Wagner obviously is a problem for them. The many competing mercenary groups that have taken part in the Russian war against Ukraine are a liability to Putin. The state certainly has lost its monopoly on violence. It's not lost; it's actually given it away to many competing actors and military formations. And now, one of them having gone a bit rogue and had military, emotional freakout, they're trying to both take their distance and to repurpose their structures in Africa. None of it is surprising, but having built Prigozhin and his men up as heroes, they have a problem. it's very difficult to deny after having told the Russian population for a year and 4 months that these are our great heroes fighting for the Ruski Mir and the Russian Federation in Ukraine. But this is all fake, you know.
Vladislav, thank you very much indeed. As you're talking to us, we're showing various images of Vladimir Putin. I'm struck by how different he looks in each of those scenes. And so this talk about there could be sort of body doubles, it maybe it's real, I don't know. But thank you for that observation, Vladislav. Craig, I know you want to get in on this one.
Well, words and the use of words are very important in our profession. I think our audience knows that. And I think we're long past the time where we need to start using words properly when talking about Peskov and Putin. You said correctly in what you read off the teleprompter, accurately, Peskov said. I think we have to get rid of the word said. I don't think it works anymore. I think we have to use the word flatulated. Peskov flatulated, Putin flatulated. These are gone beyond lies now. And when we report this, that he says this, it gives it cadence and resonance for many of our viewers or readers who really don't follow this stuff all that much. It sounds like it's for real because we have an official, we have him up on France 24 screen, we're paying attention to him. It's a friggin' lie.
We should be stating that basically this is a version of events that they stand by.
I think we have to start reporting this. We have to start reporting Russia differently. He's a liar.
Yeah. Peskov falsely claimed. Peskov asserted without providing any evidence. Expressions like that.
I think we've gone beyond that, Gulliver. I think we got to just come out and say he's a goddamn friggin' liar.
Craig,
but I may be on the far side.
No, I think basically you've actually voiced what many people think, Craig, about the whole situation, because some of the things that you hear from senior Russian sources are clearly a distortion of what reality
Macron
is.
Said, Biden said, Modi said, anyone else said, or proclaimed, or
and if you use that same vocabulary,
you
can
use that vocabulary honestly, but not with the Russians.
Yeah. Let's park that one there. Thank you very much indeed, all. Let's move on. Narendra Modi in Paris, the Indian Prime Minister, guest of honour at today's Bastille Day parade. Perhaps the biggest honour France can give to any visiting leader. Modi looking on with an element of pride as Indian soldiers join the annual military parade. Behind the scenes, though, big business deals being hatched. India signing up for Rafale fighter jets and French submarines. A multi-billion euro payday for France. And a further sign of what analysts like to call a growing strategic relationship. But is it win-win? Let's listen to both men.
We have a strategic intimacy between these two countries. This will be materialized in launching new programs that will be an extension of previous projects. We set up funds to finance Indian and French companies in that region. We are determined to act. And we also it's also based on an economic relationship. You are our second trade partner in Asia.
France and India have deep and long-standing connections. The discussions we are about to have will strengthen those ties, those connections, even more. We are going to open a new consulate in Marseille, in the south of France. We are gratified to see that a decision has been made to grant long-term visas to people of Indian origin who have studied in France.
And just because we moved on from NATO and Ukraine doesn't mean to say Ukraine still isn't at the frame, because the issue of India and Ukraine is still very relevant. Gulliver Craig, got to bring you back in. One of the issues has always been, of course, where does India stand on Ukraine?
Well, and India has close ties to Russia as a supplier of weapons, and I think that's why Ukrainians are seeing this Narendra Modi visit to France and this big arms deal as basically good news if it helps India to diversify and be more dependent on countries that are allied with Ukraine, like France. I think one of the most convincing answers I've ever heard from a Ukrainian official to the question, why aren't you afraid that Russia will use nuclear weapons, was from Alexei Reznikov, and he said, because the Indians and the Chinese won't let them. because the Indians and the Chinese have made it clear that that's a red line for them. And, although they are by no means taking an anti-Russian stance for the moment about the war in Ukraine, clearly their trade relationship with Russia gives them influence over Russia, and it's something that the Ukrainians absolutely have a very, very close eye on. And Ukraine, of course, is trying to improve its relations with both India and China as well.
Gulliver, thank you. Vladislav, do you feel reassured by this sense that India is doing more business with France and therefore it might alter how it regards the situation in Ukraine?
I honestly, I don't think it'll change anything. It's part of the course that the Indians are putting up trade relations with the French. There is going to be a military aspect of this. There will be, as has been reported, I think 26 or 23 Rafale jets being sold to the
26, the figure I saw.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yes, the 26 modern, first generation French military jets. Wouldn't mind getting some of those for Ukraine, by the way, but that's not on the table. Being sold to the Indians. This is a standard economic military cooperation pact. I don't think this is going to change anything. The Indians have a very strong deal in terms of economic cooperation with the Russians. There's a so-called rupee overhang problem where the Russians are doing so much business with the Indians that they are having trouble removing the money back out of India into Russia because they can't take it in euros or dollars. And the Indians are insisting on paying only in rupees. So the Russians are sitting on tens of billions, maybe up to soon enough 100 billion in dollars or euros worth of rupees. And the Indian government is all too happy to have that money sitting there and not being repatriated and having a trade surplus in that direction. So there's so much business also being done with the Russians, and it's such an important export valve for energy that cannot be taken out of Russia into the West. That I just don't think that in the grand scheme of things this will change anything tremendously.
Vladislav, you're getting there, Russian oil going into India being sold on?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of the Russian energy supplies had to be sold somewhere, including at sharp discounts. You can't just have it sit in Russia. So the Chinese and the Indians, they picked up the slack from the Europeans and the Americans and everybody else who was on board on the sanctions regime. So the Indians are all too happy to have energy resources being sold to them at a proper discount. So I just don't see how this is going to affect in a very grand way the relations between military relations between India and France.
Vladislav, thank you very much indeed. Richard Verley from Build, you were at the NATO Summit in Vilnius. You gave us insight on that. I'm now going to ask you for insight on this Modi-Macron relationship, because we see them shaking hands, we see them glad-handing, smiling, all that kind of thing. We always see politicians doing that kind of stuff. Do you think there is a genuinely warm relationship between these two guys?
Well, I believe Emmanuel Macron is trying hard, and considering what we just viewed, I would say, well done, President Macron. Well done, because India is a global player in what is called the Global South. So it's important from Paris to keep a link with this country. And secondly, India is an interesting partner for France, and France an interesting partner for India. So now we have to see what type of results it brings, and that is, we don't know yet. But clearly, President Macron, wants to put himself on the diplomatic agenda. He wants to play a role globally. That's very clear. And he wants to play a role also because he has a lot of difficulty in France. We know it, and we may talk about it later. He had the riots recently. Now it's 14th of July. He wants to expose himself still as a big player in the world, as someone that the world has to look at. And he wants to profile France still as a country with influence. So in that regard, India is a good choice. Now there is a risk in it, and the risk is always the same for Macron's strategy, is to invite and to hug and to give warm welcome to those countries who buy weapons. So I would say if you want to be influential in France, you buy submarine and you buy plane. That's not a very good thing. France needs other allies than those who buy weaponry from the French industries.
Richard, how will the readers of Blick be interpreting this Modi-Macron relationship? How will you be putting it?
Viewed from the rest of Europe, I think Macron still retains a good international standing. We know he's suffering politically in France, but he's seen as a man of initiative. And what he's doing now with India is a diplomatic initiative. So if you look at it kind of neutrally, you know, as a Swiss, again, we could see well done, but will it bring results? That has to be seen.
Richard. France, you're a correspondent for Blick. Thank you very much indeed. Stay with us, please. You're up next in a moment. Craig, final comment on this Modi in Paris moment.
The number one consideration of any leader of a country is providing an abundance of food and energy for the population. Everything else is secondary to that. Everything. Modi's on a good deal with the Russians. And he's also got sufficient food supplies. So this is going to continue for quite some time. The Indians are not going to sign on to the sanctions. We can talk to them till the cows come home, but he's providing his people with apparently an abundant supply of reasonably priced energy. And you know what? It gets hot down there. They need a lot of air conditioners, and the way global warming is going, they're going to need a lot more.
Complaints about humanitarian situation there from Amnesty France. That won't change?
I wrote my first foreign story when I was 20 years old, a long time ago. I've heard that question for decades. It never changes. It's a story. The older I get, the more, and I am in this profession a long time, the more a question like that troubles me, because you're right. You know, we should be writing that story. It's an important story. There's no question about it. But the more we write about it, it would seem that the fewer people listen, and even fewer people do anything significant to change it. That doesn't mean we should stop considering it, but I'm fatigued by it at this point. I've seen it too many times, and I've seen too few people doing anything necessary to change the playing field.
Craig Capitas, thank you. Let's move on to our next subject. The BBC, the UK's state broadcaster with a worldwide reputation for quality and probity, is in crisis after the disintegration of its main news anchor. Father of five, Hugh Edwards, face of the channel for over 2 decades, is now in a mental ward of a hospital for profound depression. This was revealed by his own wife after days of national speculation about an unnamed BBC presenter. It follows an expose by the Sun newspaper, an unnamed BBC male face paying over €40,000 to a teenage crack addict for sex images. The whole story grew from there. In spite of the Sun's implication of crime committed, the police have decided after investigation there's actually no case to answer. The story now concerns a family left in pieces and questions for the BBC and the tabloid Sun about how they have behaved. Craig, can I let you loose on this one first?
Headless man found in topless bar. Look, this is Rupert Murdoch. This is how he makes money. What do we have here? A famous person uses a dating app. He links up with an adult. Nothing comes of it. They never met. And the adult threatens to write about it, maybe in the Sun, where he'll probably be paid money for it if history is any guide. And the famous person grows very angry. You know, the BBC is scared and bumfuzzled and confused, as they usually are, and Rupert Murdoch makes a lot of money. The bottom line here, this is really shoddy journalism from where we come from, not from where they come from. There was nothing criminal here, according to the police. If there had been something criminal, then there's a story. But they don't think that way on the tabloids, you know, on the old Fleet Street sensibility, and it's Rupert Murdoch once again. You know, we don't know. I feel sorry for this television presenter, this British television presenter with this wonderful Welsh voice. He sounds like Richard Burton, You know, I mean, I've seen him on you know, and he has a history, according to reports in his family, that he's been struggling with depression for many years. And don't tell me the son didn't know that. How cruel of them to do that. Now, had there been a criminal investigation, a criminal indictment, that's something completely different. But until that happens, keep your powder dry.
And the son saying that the parents of the teenager who's now 20 years old involved didn't accept any money to do an interview with them. However, the son's kind of TV branch, Talk TV, offering them tens of thousands of pounds to speak to
this
them.
is the interesting thing.
This is the kind of Murdoch dichotomy.
Yeah, see, but this is the interesting thing. The Sun can say whatever it wants, but, you know, if we tried to go up there and report what the Sun actually did, send a team of France 24, Daily Beast reporters, you know, or New York Times or Journal Report, well, it couldn't Journal, Murdoch owns that, into this to find out exactly what happened, the Sun would not talk to us. They would lie, they would obfuscate. So it's just a different world of journalism out there, and what's really shameful here is this fella, Hugh Edwards, what was done to him for no other reason than to have a headline, headless man found in topless bar. Film at 11.
Vladislav, can I bring you on this one?
Sure. I have very little empathy for the way that the Brits run their social norms, read journalism. I mean, some parts of it are more virile and stronger in terms of institutional coherence than our own American journalism structures, which basically collapsed over the last 10 years. And because of the money, the good and the bad, and the fact that they do have a real economic model in the UK, they sort of kept journalism going the way it's always gone in the UK, for the good and the bad. This is the bad aspect of it. This is the vulgarity and nastiness and gotcha journalism that the Brits are known for. On the other hand, their economic system, their economic model still works, unlike our American journalistic model, which is in the middle of a long-term decomposition process or collapse, right? Obviously, when you're the face of that kind of institution, like a cleric or a judge, you are kept to a standard of morality which is higher than ordinary people. A middle manager in a factory of that gentleman's age sending money to a young woman for naked photographs would probably be able to keep his job if the police said that there was nothing actionable, legally speaking. Whereas a cleric, a judge, or a senior journalist on TV who is the representative of kind of, truth, a moral truth for the society, probably not be able to get out of this with his job intact. And I guess that's more of a statement about the standards of morality to which people in social positions like that are kept. But the Brits are kind of nasty in the way they run their journalism. That's what it is.
Vladislav, I can't dispute anything you're saying. Thank you for that comment, that observation. Gulliver, can I bring you in to get your sense of the situation? I mean, clearly, just to give you a little bit more of the story, Hugh Edwards, the man concerned, clearly there's the issue regarding paying the money to a teenager for the photographs. There's the issue about hooking up with a man via a dating app. During lockdown, perhaps breaking lockdown rules. And at the centre, of course, he's married with 5 children. So clearly it's a horrific situation, a mess, but no crime committed. Nonetheless, lots of questions asked about how he's behaved.
Well, I haven't followed it closely, but I don't even really know why we're covering it. I mean, it's not a story if there's no crime committed by Hugh Edwards. It's not news, really. And it's also not news that the Murdoch papers are awful, right? I mean, I've always said any broadcaster that's owned by Murdoch, I mean, and that's 20 years. I mean, it's not going to change. that's not news either, you know.
Yeah, can I back you on that one, Gulliver? I mean, I'm from the city of Liverpool. It's well known how the Sun reported on the Hillsborough disaster in 1989 when 95 Liverpool fans were killed. It's now 97 if you add those who've died subsequently. And obviously the headline that Murdoch's paper published was The Truth, which turned out to be a whole catalogue of lies about the behaviour of the Liverpool fans. And that's not me saying it, it's not the Liverpool fans saying it, it's the public inquiry into what happened saying it.
And the fact that you're an Everton fan should have... We should not take that into account.
On this issue, the City of Liverpool with both teams is completely united.
Okay.
Boycotting the Sun, don't buy the Sun completely. Shops refusing to stock the Sun, the fans refusing to ever buy the Sun. So
really?
Clearly it's happened since then. I mean, sales of the Sun have gone ever since 1989 on Merseyside completely.
Amazing.
Richard, any thoughts? Richard Verley joining us from Blick.
Yes, well, it rings a big bell for me working for Switzerland's largest circulation newspaper because it's clearly a red line. What the Sun is doing, it's not journalism. It's pure accusation based on lies. They fabricate a story. And I was kind of surprised, but I don't know the details, by the reaction of the BBC, the fact that the BBC immediately followed up on the Sun. My understanding is they were probably under pressure because the Sun was coming out with the story. Now, as far as journalism is concerned, I have a thought for France. There is in France a tycoon, his name is Mr. Vincent Bolloré, who apparently liked to follow up on the Murdoch model. And we have a TV talk show with Mr. Hanouna, who has some kind of, I would say, the Sun tendency to adopt the tendency of fabricating stories. So that worries me a lot. Journalism, even for larger circulation newspaper, should never go beyond that line, and the Sun is doing it all again and over. Now, my question to you, as you are a British citizen, why is the Sun keeping so many readers in the UK?
That's a really good question, and I can't answer it. I think maybe there's an element of people's brains that needs a little bit of diversion or some kind of sense that the media isn't a reality and that they find it amusing. People like to poke fun at people, which obviously is a very low point of humanity, and I think it really plays into that. That's my kind of feel about it all. And then there's the other part who just wants some decent sports reporting and look at it for that kind of thing. But in my experience, it's not that great in sports reporting either. So I don't understand why it exists. That's my answer to your question, Richard. And I think it is a very sad reflection about what happens in my homeland, as it were. That's all I can say. And this idea of the kind of the private life, but the public humiliation. I mean, it is so distressing, isn't it? And one has to feel for the family at the centre of this.
Well, precisely. You talk about humiliation, and if you do the comparison with France, I was mentioning this Cyril Hanouna talk show. That is one of his tactics. He is doing regular humiliation whenever he invites people on show. So that worries me. I do not know whether Mr. Bolloré wants to imitate Mr. Murdoch, but it seems to be the case. Then we may expect some type of news, Sun-style news coming in France soon. I hope not, but let's see what will happen.
Richard Verley of Blick, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Geneva. Thanks to Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent in Kyiv, who's covering all matters Ukraine for us. Thanks to Vladislav Davidson of the Atlantic Council, and thanks to Craig Kapitas at Daily Beast. Great to see you all. Thanks for your time. Thanks to you for watching. Stay with us here on France 24.